Okay, so today we are beginning the content for the fifth project, the database modification project. I'm going to give you a warning about this project. This project was actually designed to be a final project for this class. It brings together lots of things that we've done in the prior segments, along with this one. So we're learning specifically about interacting with databases through Excel, through VBA. But we'll be doing lots of other stuff, including some of the things that we're doing today. And so after a few years, and it used to be the very last project done, but I know that all of your other classes get stacked up right at the very end of the semester as well. And so it turns out that what used to be the fifth project was pretty easy. And so I put that as the last one. And so we're hitting kind of the culminating experience a little early in this class. Because students kind of struggled with this one more, what I've done in like maybe 3 different lectures between now and when that's due, I'm going to give you major portions of the solution. So, if it's like your benefit from actually coming and listening to this part of the lecture is that you'll realize that the stuff we're covering today is getting you a long way down the road to get that project started. So, yeah. So, and if you happen to be listening to the video at the moment and you listen to this introductory part before I actually got to the VBA, good for you. You found that out as well. Okay, so this data that we're downloading today, this crime.zip, we need to get both of these downloaded. And this is the data that we'll be using for that project. So I've got that downloaded, but I have to extract it. Now I'm trying to remember, how do you extract on Mac? I think you just hit enter on the file and that extracts it. Is that right? Select the file and hit enter in Finder. Whoops. Here's my downloads. In Windows, I'm just going to right-click that file and say extract all. And that should extract those files. It's going to prompt me where to put it. And I'm just going to put it in my downloads folder. That's fine. If you want to put it somewhere else, that's fine. But it's going to create a folder called crime and put the files in there. I'll go ahead and extract that. And so now I've got these folders. I think I told you the story about when the FBI called me and told me they sent me their CD. Did I tell you that story? Yeah. Oh, this is fun. So this data that we're looking at here, just go ahead and pull up. Let me pull up one that's a little bit bigger than Alabama. I'll pull up Texas. I got a bunch of colleges in Texas. So this is the crimes known to law enforcement data. So enable editing. So essentially, law enforcement agencies can voluntarily report data to the FBI about crimes in their jurisdictions. It's not mandatory. And for that reason, you'll notice there's only 48 files, even though there's 50 states. And presumably there could be some other territories and such that don't count in the 50 that could have their own data. So not everyone reports, but this is crime at Abilene Christian University for the year 2011. They had 4,000 students enrolled. They had 4 violent crimes. Those are actually, it's an aggregate of these 4. So there were 4 aggravated assaults, that was it. And they had 101 property crimes, most of which was larceny. They had 1 motor vehicle theft, 5 burglaries, and no arson. But man, remember the Alamo. Alamo Community College has 4 cases of arson. Yikes. They're quite a bit bigger. But this is data then that gets reported. And this is the way, at least when I pulled this data back in 2012 or something, this is the way that the FBI made this data available to the public. In fact, they had some summary data published on their website. And back then it was hey, if you want this full data set, we're not publishing the full data set online, but if you want the full data set, email crimedata@fbi.gov. So I thought, oh, I'm going to email crimedata@fbi.gov. I said, hey, it's Professor Allen at BYU. I'd love to use this data in some examples I'm teaching in class. How about sending me the data? And they didn't even respond to me. It's at least acknowledge that you got my email. Nothing. About 2 or 3 weeks later, a CD shows up in the mail to me, and it's the data. Here's the CD with the data on it. That's great. I popped it in the computer, looked at it, said, sure enough, this is the data. I'll get around to it sometime. About 2 or 3 weeks later, I was in my office and I got a call. Back when I actually had a physical phone on my desk and they had caller ID and it said Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I got to tell you, I live a really boring life. And yet when it said FBI, I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? They're coming for me. And I answered the phone a little bit hesitantly and they said, oh, Professor Allen, good. Did we send you a CD with data on it? I was all like, yes. And like right there in my top drawer, I pulled it out. I said, I'm looking at it now. And they said, oh, good. That was our original. Could you send that back to us? If you promise never to call me again, I will send it back to you straight away. That's your tax dollars at work, folks. That's wonderful. I don't know. They had an intern or something. Send this data to Professor Allen. Okay. So yeah, and the thing that's kind of interesting to me is that, this is data that would be really good to be able to import into a database. But it's meant not to be read by a machine, but to be read by a human. It's got footnotes and like footnotes at the bottom, and it's kind of built in a table. Man, they should really give this in a format that's a raw format that could be brought in more easily, but it's not. So the task that this project's going to have you do is like write a program that will go through all of the records in all 50 of these files or 48 of these files and insert this data, like parse this data out of here and insert it into database tables so that you could query it and like be able to, do kind of summary things kind of across states and so forth. But today we're using the data really just to have some files that we can have kind of, open and close. And so we're talking about how do we work with files at the operating system level? How do we like bring up a dialog box that allows the user to pick file or a folder that they want to open and process? So, but that's the data that we have here. So we've got it extracted. Does anyone need help getting that data extracted out of the archive and into their actual files on their computer? All right. So I've got my workbook open. I don't think there was any code in this workbook because it's looking kind of empty over here. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert a module. And then I'm ready to get started. So the first thing that we're looking at is something called the file dialog. So far, we've seen a couple of different dialogs, or at least first, we've seen for sure one dialog that you can open from VBA. Let me go ahead and just create a sub procedure here. We'll call this file dialog, sub file, F-I-L-E dialog. One dialog box that you've seen so far is the message box, MSGBOX, and then you can just say like, hello. And we could run this, and that would just bring this as a dialog box. The dialog box is just a window that pops up and kind of allows for some interaction, a dialogue between the system and the user. Let's give it a message hello here, and we say, okay, so that's a dialog box. But some of the dialog boxes we'd like to be able to work with are like this. If I said file open, I'd like to be able to bring up like this dialog box and let the user communicate with my program by going and selecting a file or a folder or a set of files. And so that's what we're going to look at right now. So instead of using that simple dialog box, we're going to invoke that other built-in dialog box. So to be able to do that, I'm going to need to declare an object variable. So dim fd as, and here's the type it's going to be, office dot file dialog. So this is creating an object variable. Somebody tell me something about what an object variable is. I mean, like an integer variable, it's a variable, it's a name for a location in memory. And what can I put in that location in memory? I can put an integer up to 2 bytes of data, so plus or minus 32,000. Someone tell me something about an object variable. So what does an object variable do? Anything. It's a variable, so it's a name for a location in memory. And what do I actually put in that location in memory? I'll narrow it down. Do I put an object in that location in memory? You might think that that's the answer, but it's not. An object variable only holds a reference to an object. So somewhere in memory, I've got an object, and it's might take up quite a bit of memory. An object variable just holds the memory address of where that object is. So in this case, all I've done here is I have declared enough information. I've declared a big enough block of memory to be able to hold the memory address of an object somewhere. And the only kind of object I'm allowed to connect that up to, like to refer to, is going to be one of these kinds of objects, a file dialog object. So now I'm going to actually create that object to work with or attach onto it. So just like if I had a range object, I would say set RNG equal to identify some range. In this case, FD, set FD equal to all of Excel. So application is how I refer to all of Excel. Dot APPLICATION dot file dialog. So here's a method of the application that says, oh, you want to create one of these file dialog objects. And there's several that I can choose from. So in parentheses, I'll say, what kind do I want? Do I want to pick a file, a folder? Or I think we want to pick a file. Open or save as dialog box. This will be our file picker. And that's it. That doesn't open up the dialog box. It just creates that dialog box in memory, creates that object in memory, and it hooks up my object variable to that. So if I want to refer to that, I can now refer to it with FD. And so I should be able to show that by just saying fd.show. Now, I'm not doing much with it now, but at this point, that should actually show that dialog box. I'm gonna do something meaningful. It'll take a little more code, but that should, when I run this subprocedure, should display that file dialog box. And come back to my worksheet over here and run the code. Run the code. There we go. So now it's bringing up my file dialog box. The idea here is I can pick, one or more files. If I hold my shift key down, I can select multiple files here. And I'll be able to tell which files the user has picked. So the question is, how do I tell what they've picked? And it turns out that our object has a property called selected items. So let's do this. Let's just say debug.print selected fd.selected items. And we'll see that it's an object. I put dot, it has some other things. Let's just put the count right here. So right now that's just going to print to my immediate window how many items the user selected. I'll run this, I'll select a couple of files. I'll select 3 files, say open, and it is printed 3. Now, I'm going to go ahead and iterate across this collection of files, and we'll just print out what actually it says about what's been selected. So for that, let me go ahead and dim x as an integer. And then instead of printing the count, I'll put that in a loop for x equals 1 to the count. And I'm going to print fd selected items dot item sub x. Put next for my for next loop. And now if the user has only selected 1, it'll print the file name. If they've selected multiple, it should print off all of those files. Give it a try. And I'll select 3 files. And yeah, it's not just the file name, but it is the full path to those files that it is captured in that selected items collection. Wonder what happens if I try to cancel out of this. Still does fine, doesn't print anything, but it's okay. Let me just kind of express to you how I can tell the user pressed cancel here. So I'm going to say if the selected items count is equal to 0. If they've closed this dialog box and they haven't selected anything, And that's exactly what happens when they hit cancel. Then I'll just say exit sub. So showing up this dialog box, if they click cancel, I'm done. I'm not going to do anything else. Otherwise, we'll go through and do whatever they've asked us to do, or do whatever our code is supposed to do in this case. Questions? Okay. So in this case, I think what I'd like to do is give myself a little more configuration options. So after I've declared my variable and actually built the object in memory, before I show it, I would like to do some configuration of it. So here I'm going to say fd.multi-select, allow multi-select equals false. By default, that's going to be true, but I'm going to set it to false here, which says, you know what? You can only select one file. Don't allow the user to select multiple files. I don't know what to do with multiple files. Just let them choose one. All right. So now if I try to hold the shift key down or the control key and select other ones, it just won't do it. Just selects whichever one is selected there. So I can kind of configure how this thing works after I've created the object before I've displayed it. And I'm going to do one more thing here, and I'm going to manipulate the filters. What's a filter, you say? So these are the filters that you can put here. By default, it just shows all files. But I could say, no, I just want to show Excel files. And so to do that, I will say fd, again, before I show it, fd.filters.clear. I'm going to say whatever was there before, let's get rid of it. And now let's add some more filters. So we're going to add, and it takes two arguments. One is the text that we want to show. And the second one is a comma-separated list of the filter that I want to express that with. So all Excel files would be star.xlsx, star.xlsm, star.xlsb. It's a binary format. It's like an XLSM. You can put macros in it, but it's not the standard format. Or star.xls, just XLS, like prior to 2007 format. That will be one. We'll say, you know what? I just want to do another one for data files. So Excel files, data files. And that'll be star.csv, star.txt, star.tsv, and I don't know, star.dat. I don't know what to be. You can put whatever you want here. Maybe I'll add another filter for Word files. Star.docx, star.docm, I think there's probably a doc B as well. B stands for binary. Star.doc. And now those should be filters that the user could just choose when this dialog box opens up. So first one there is Excel files, but we can drop that down and choose any of our other ones. Might want to put all files on there as well. Star.star. And maybe I would like it to, even though that's the bottom one I'm showing, I would like that to be the one that's selected. Well, there's a property called filter index that I can set to the index I'm after. I'm going to set it to 3. I'm not sure if it's 0-based or 1-based, but set it to 3. It'll either give me all files if it's 0-based, or it'll give me Word files if it's 1-based, and then I'll be able to adjust. Looks like it's 1-based because it brought up Word files as the default ones. So I'll change that to 4, and that will default to show all files. But we could change it. The midterm. Questions? So this one's allowing me to do a file picker, right? If I wanted the user to pick folders, not files, I just make this the folder picker. I think that's what the homework that's due tonight is, having you do pick a folder. By the way, I've had a student that's reporting that he's having some trouble running that. So if that doesn't work for you, get it working, but it won't grade for you. Let's see. Do you have an email address? Oh no, just upload it to Learning Suite. So you can always upload a submission to Learning Suite, and that's the cue to the TA that says, hey, this wouldn't grade for me. Would you please evaluate it by hand? So you might end up, if some other students are having the same problem, you might end up with that. Not a big deal, just upload to Learning Suite. Okay, I think that's what I want to show you about the file dialog. So now let's take a look at some other things that we might do with like manipulating files from VBA. So let's do this next. Let me create a sub procedure, and here's where it starts, like showing you this is how I think you should structure your solution to the 5th project. So let me create a sub procedure here called process process1 file. And I'm going to expect to take in here a path to the file. Oops, not in quotes. I'll just call this file path. And the idea here is like ultimately, you're going to have to open up these Excel files that have all the crime data in one at a time. And then you'll have a loop that kind of goes through and reads down through all the data and figures out when to stop and what to do with all the database stuff, which we haven't gotten to yet. But here, I would just like to open that. I'd like to open up that workbook. So I'm passing a path to a workbook. So here, I'm just going to say, how do I open a workbook? Workbooks collection dot open. And then I'll give it the file path. But I need to be able to refer to this. This will be a separate workbook from the one that I'm working in. So I'd really like to make sure that I know which one I'm talking about. Now, this is going to be the active workbook. So I might be tempted just to say, well, hey, now I can tell the difference between active workbook is the one that just got opened, and this workbook is the one with the code in it. I'll be able to work back and forth between those two workbooks. But that's risky, because if the user, like while that code's running, if the user clicks on a different workbook, that'll become the active workbook. I really want to be sure that I know this is the workbook I'm talking about. Well, the good news is when I open a workbook, it returns a reference to the file that just got opened. So I'm going to declare a variable, MWB, as a workbook variable. And now I will set WB equal to workbooks open. But now that I'm doing something with the return value, I have to put parentheses around the arguments. So that will open up the workbook. And I'll stop right there. Here's where I would like do the work to actually process through that file. And then here, let me just go ahead and say, now that I'm done with the workbook, I'll close it. WB.close. And the first argument here is save changes. I think I definitely want to say false for that. So the idea here is I'm going to open up the workbook, and I may very well think, this workbook's going to be easier to work with if I make some changes to it. So I might feel free to kind of change and reorganize the data on that sheet. But then when I close it, saying, hey, those changes were just for me to process this data more easily, don't save those. Don't save the file. Close it without saving it. So now I should be able to hook this up to my file dialog box here. And instead of just printing this off, I should be able to say process1 file and pass it one of those files that was selected. So I'm going to change allow multi-select back to true here. So I could select multiple files, and I will process them through, by sending them through one at a time to process1 file. And for this, I think I'm going to switch my filter index to 1 because Excel files is what I'm expecting. Because after all, I'm saying open that as a workbook. So now if I run this, it should say whatever file or files I've selected, and it should open those up one at a time. This stop will, stop it so I can actually see it happen. And then when I hit play, it should proceed through and keep going through the set. So I'll run my file dialog. I'll choose these two. Let's see, better not choose those two. One of them's already open. Crime 23 would be okay. I'll do a couple of these census workbooks. I'll say okay. Okay, so now it's hit that breakpoint, and in fact, it has opened up that crime data 23 that I had open here. And if I hit play again, it should allow that one to close, open up the next one. I hit play again, it'll finish that one off and open up the next one. Nice. So now, there's a lot of heavy lifting to do here still to kind of go through that data and decide what we're going to do with it. But that is the idea. So I can open up multiple files, allow the user to specify multiple files, and then this loop will send them off to be processed at the process one file subprocedure one at a time, passing the path the user specified, and then using that path to open up that particular workbook. Questions here? Now, it could have been that that's the way I wrote the project, was to actually open the file dialog box and go select the files. But what I really did was I said, I want you to assume that those files are in a relative, all the files are in a place relative to where the workbook is. And just go get them. Don't ask the user, just assume they're in the right place and go get them all. So that's what we're going to do next. So let's make sure that we have these files saved. I'm going to kind of show you where I have them saved, and you'll want to have kind of the same pattern. So this file for me is called crime data. Oops, it's called crime data WW24. World War 24, that'd be bad. I'm going to save this and just rename that the way I actually want it to be, which is only one W. So at the same location, I have my folder called crime. So it doesn't matter, you don't have to be, certainly don't have to be in the same path as I am, because you won't have a user called gallen2 on your computer. But as long as you have that file we're working on located at the same place as a folder called crime that has the files in it, we should be in good shape. The code that I'm going to write should find those files for you as well. So the workbook I'm working on is in a folder, and also in that folder, I have another folder called crime that has all of the raw data files in it. So let me go ahead and get open back up again. Okay, so this is process one file. I want to make another subprocedure here called process all files. Oh, now I would like to be able to iterate across all the files in that crime folder that's in the same location as this workbook. Okay. Now it turns out that if you were just to Google how to iterate across a folder of files in VBA, most of the examples that you see out there are going to be saying, great, step one, create an instance of the file scripting object, which works just fine. It works actually quite well, but it's code that is, limits you just to Windows. So a user using that wouldn't be able to use it on the Mac if they opened it on the Mac. And so I'm going to show you kind of an older style of doing it, but it's cross-platform compatible. So it's a little bit different because we're kind of going back, the origin of the statements we're using is the 1970s. And it was before the basic language was object-oriented. And so it's going to be a little bit different. Let's see how to do it. I'm going to need a couple of control variables here. So let me dim a variable called file name. Dim file name as string. Now, to kind of understand what we're about to say, I'm going to open up a command prompt on my computer. And I think the administrator has taken away the CMD command prompt, but the much more powerful PowerShell is still here. So like this is like when I started using computers, this is what the whole interface looked like. There were no windows, there were no colors. It was like a dark color with a light color or a light color with a dark color. And like that was your whole computer. This was it. And if you wanted to see like what files you had available, you would ask for a directory listing, dir. And that would show you, there's the files. These are the files that are available here. I could change directories into my downloads folder, cd downloads. And then I could do a listing there as well. Here's the files that are in my downloads folder. And here I could change to my crime folder. And here's the files that are in my crime folder. These are the ones I'm actually after. Now, if someone is like, if there are like other files besides .xlsx files here, I don't want to see those. I only want to see those that are xlsx. So let me just make another file here that's not xlsx. Okay, so I should have something called file list. Yeah, here it is. File list.txt is now in here. And I don't really want to see that one. That's not one that I want to process. I only want to process one that in xlsx. Well, I can do a directory for a specific file, utah.xlsx. And it says, yep, there's a file called utah.xlsx. Here's when it was created. Here's how big it is and so forth. But I could also say, instead of Utah, I want to see a listing of files that start with anything and end with .xlsx. And that will show me only those. So my file list one is going to be gone here. Only one F file in is Florida. So I can establish this filter. This statement from the command prompt is the origin of the statement we're about to see in VBA. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to set file name equal to dir. It's the same name. And then in parentheses, I'm going to put the path name that I want to look for. Oh, let me make one more change out here. So if I wasn't already inside the crime folder, I'm going to go back up one directory. I could say I want to look in crime / I can tell it the folder and the filter together that I want to do. And here's my same set of files. It's the ones in that crime directory, even though that wasn't where I was. And so I can specify these two things, the path and the filter that I want to see in the directory. The first one is the path. Now, my path is going to be relative to my current workbook. So if I come up here and say, I want to just look at this workbook, .path, it will tell me where this one is. Well, the path I'm actually looking for is that with a / and crime. That's the one I really want to see the directory listing for. But I don't know what this part is going to be. Well, that's okay. I can ask. So I'm going to say file name is going to equal the directory of this path concatenated with, I could come in here and say /crime. The problem is, if this runs on a Mac, and I am kind of trying to anticipate making something that could be cross-platform compatible, what's the file separator, the path separator in Mac? It's not a /. What is it? It's a /. Erg. Fortunately, I can ask that question too. Application.path separator. If I run application.path separator on a Windows machine, it returns that. If I run it on a Mac machine, it returns the other one. So instead of hard coding the path separator in there, I can concatenate on the path separator. So now I'm saying, listen, whatever the path of the current workbook is, plus the right path separator, plus crime. That's the file that I'm going to open. You go ahead and stop this, and I'll run this code right to here. Here's something a little bit inexplicable when you're first looking at this. Let me print what's in file name. You almost expect file name to be some kind of a list, like a collection. Maybe it has a file name.length. FILENAME dot. There's nothing that comes up when I press dot. That's because it's just a string variable. Oh, sorry, I've done the first part here. Not quite ready to move on. The second thing that I want is to put on that /star.xlsx. So another path separator. And concatenated with star.xlsx. That line's getting kind of long, so let me do this. Let me just put, I'm going to put this whole expression into a variable called path. And now I'll just concatenate path onto there. So dir path that and star.xlsx. So I'll go ahead and run. Now I'll go ahead and run. Okay, so I have a variable called path, and that is like it's figured out that path, wherever the workbook is, the proper path separators, and the crime folder. I'm interested in that one. And then I'm saying, give me a directory of that path with star.xlsx on the end. And I've assigned that into file name. So if I look at file name, it's got just one name in it. That seems crazy. I mean, it's a whole path. How many does it bring back? It brings back like 48. Yeah, the first one is Alabama. And that's the one I have here, but I really, at this point, only have the one. It's like, this is the way they wrote the language. You ask for the path, it gives you the first one. But then it remembers how many it's given you. So if I was to have another statement here, set file name equal to that again, but this time, don't tell it a path. It'll be like, oh, you just want the next file off of the one we just gave you. Let me just drag my current position back there and run that. And now that should be the next one, Alaska. If I do it again, Arizona. So the first time I ask for dir, I tell it the path and filter that I want. And then I just call dir again without specifying, and it gives me the next one off the list that I already asked for. I will concede. That's a weird way to do it, but that's the language. Do any of you feel a loop coming on? Yeah, let's just put a loop around this one right here. Let's do a do loop. Do loop. And what am I going to do? I'm going to print file name. How am I going to get out of this loop? Well, it turns out when I ask for, say, file name equals dir, and it's already given me the whole list, it will give me back one more that's an empty string. Like after the list is done, and if I ask again, it goes, great, there's none left. And the way it says there's none left is it gives me back an empty string. So I'm going to do until file name is equal to an empty string. And just because I always want to put in my do loop a do events, I'm going to put that in here as well. Easy to put yourself into an endless loop with a do loop. Probably even going to save my file before I run it. So now I should be able to method without a suitable object. Oh, this should be debug.print. Fdebug. Should be able to come up to the beginning of this loop and it should print off the rest of those files. Oh, delightful. And after it gave me back Wyoming, I asked it again. Like it said, it gave me Wyoming. I said, go back to the top, do until file name is blank. File name was Wyoming, so it didn't exit. It printed Wyoming, said, give me the next one, and it gave me back a 0-length string. I got to the bottom, went up here, do until file name is blank. Ah, it's blank, and that's what dropped me out. Now, the problem here is that if I was to do another dir statement in the middle of this, and actually I was like calling some other code and it did a dir statement, it would reset the list of files that it's working from. And so I would feel comfortable just using the dir statement if I wasn't calling some other sub-procedure here. But what I'm about to do is, instead of printing the file name, in fact, I'm going to call process one file. But I have to pass it the full path. So instead of just passing the file name, which is just like the name of the file, I'm going to pass it path concatenated with the file name. And I will actually call process one file. Now this won't be bad. Print this. And maybe for now, let me go ahead and disable the opening part of this so it doesn't open it or close it. I'm just going to have it print the file path down here so we can see it work without actually opening up all 48 of those files. So I'll stop my code and run it again, and that should just print off all those file names. Get rid of the stop here. Yeah, so it's done the full path to all of these. The reason that I feel a little bit uncomfortable about this is that, man, just looking at this code, I'm not sure what is happening down here at process one file. And if process one file calls the dir statement and specifies a path, it's going to blow away my list that I'm working through. And so rather than call call it from inside this loop, I'm going to say, let me just make a really tight loop that runs fast and just loads up the paths that I'm after. And then I'll take that list and iterate across it to go do all of the long running work. That way, if this other code does a dir statement, it won't interrupt anything. So rather than process the file here, I'm just going to keep track of them. So I'll give myself another dim statement up here, and I'm going to dim files as a new collection. I could just say dim files as collection. That would create an object variable that's allowed to connect onto a collection. I would then have to say, hey, by the way, files is equal to a new collection. Set file equal to new collection. Now this is similar to what we did here, or what we did before. We declared a variable to the file dialog, and then we set that variable equal to something that created that file dialog. But there's this is so common that I create something, a variable to refer to it, and then just set it equal to a new one of those things. They made a shorthand syntax, which is just on your dim statement, you can tell it, hey, make a new collection, and then that will actually do the binding as well. So this will actually create a collection and connect it onto my files object. So now I'll just say files dot add. Here's where I'll add that full path. So now, as I'm going through the files from the operating system, I'm just loading up the paths into this collection. And that'll be an object that I can then iterate across later. Now, you might think, well, Professor Allen, you're not going to be opening any files down here. You're not going to be doing the dir. Sorry, you're not going to be executing the dir. So you don't really have to do this little trick. But anytime I'm calling some other sub-procedure from inside this loop, I think I'm just going to feel more comfortable with my code knowing that nothing, that I'm not actually using the dir statement to manage that loop. So I'm going to take this call and bring it out of that loop, and I'll set up another loop for this one. So this one now just loads the relevant file paths into a collection. And then this one is going to process the files. And I'll just use a for loop for this one. Dim x as an integer for x equals 1, 2 files dot length, dot count. Next. And it just prints whatever I send down there. So let's just see if it prints them off. And what I'm after is not the path and the file name, but files sub x. So here I'm using the dir statement to actually work through all my list of files, putting them into a collection. And then here I'm just iterating across that collection to send the path down to the process file, which will actually do the lifting for one, each file one at a time. So, and right now it's just printing things off. So if I run it again, it should just print the names of those files, which it does. Delightful. Questions? Covered a lot of ground so far today. Show me how comfortable you are with what we've done today, 0 to 5. 5, 5, 5, 4, 5, 4, 5, 4, 2. Okay. Any questions or anything you want to see a little more of before we move on? All right. Let's go ahead and say, listen, even like when I'm doing development here, I don't think I really want to have to be processing all the files. I want to be able to say, like right now, I'm working on the ones from California. I want to make sure that I'm getting all the California data in correctly. I don't want to have to go through Arizona, Alaska, Arkansas, Colorado, whoever's before California to get to it. I want to be able to go straight there. So let me just set up a little, just only used here for development, a procedure that will just run the one that I'm after. So sub my Acme sub runner. And it's just going to call process one file. But it's going to pass a specific file name to it. Here's California. Oops. And now I'm going to go ahead and open this one up again. Get my open, my close, and my stop involved. So now I'll run my sub runner, and that's just going to bring up the one file that I'm currently working on. Here is California. Oh, autosave. I don't want autosave. Now, if I look at the California file, and let me just open up Utah as well. Like there's something structurally different between these two files. Can you see what it is? There's a difference in here that I would really like there not to be a difference for. Yeah, column B. It turns out that when they're making this data, if you've got colleges that have a campus, like have multiple campuses, you get an extra column in here, column B. That is a nightmare because now, depending on whether there's any, and over here at Utah, there's no schools reporting that have multiple campuses. And so we just don't have that column, which means I got to know, where is the student enrollment? Well, it's either in column B or it's in column C. It would be better if it was always in column C. So what could I do? Yeah, let me just look and see if B5 says campus. And if it says campus, student enrollment is where it belongs. But if it doesn't say campus, I'd like to just move everything over, give myself a campus column. So let's do that. So down here in process one file, I've opened it right here. Let's just do this. If my workbook dot, and oh, here's a little bit of a problem because look at what this sheet is named. It's the 11 means it's 2011 data, and this is table 9. Like in their main report, this is the data that is for table 9. So table9.ca. So I don't even know the sheet name. It's going to be different depending on which sheet I'm after. So how can I get to that first sheet regardless of what it's called? Well, I have my collection of worksheets. Here's my workbook object. This is the workbook that we just opened. Yeah, worksheets 1. And actually, you can actually say sheets 1. There's another collection called sheets that we haven't talked about. What's the difference between the sheets collection and the worksheets collection? Worksheets collection is just a collection of all of your worksheets. A sheets collection is a collection of all the kinds of sheets you could have in a workbook. What? There's more than a worksheet kind of sheet you could have? There's one other kind of sheet you can have. It's not a worksheet. What is it? What's that? How I wished you could just, so many times in my life, I've wished you could just open up a text editor. Like this is a place to put text as a worksheet, but that's not it. You can't do that. It's a chart. You can make a chart that's the whole sheet. And that's the other sheet. So if you have charts that are sheets themselves, not just charts on a sheet, but charts that are the sheet, they're included in the sheets collection, not in the worksheets collection. Since there's only one here, it doesn't matter if I use worksheets or sheets, but I prefer to use worksheets if that's really what I'm after. So if worksheet sub 1 dot cells or dot range, what did I say? Was it B5? Dot range B5 is not equal to campus, then what do I want to do? I want to insert. In fact, you know, just maybe to simplify things a little bit on this code, I'm probably going to make a sheet variable here. So instead of worksheets 1, dim s as a worksheet, set s equal to that first worksheet, and then I just have to say s for the rest of these. If s B5 is different than campus, what do I want to do? I want to insert a column. And I think I want to insert it as the second column. So s.columns sub 2 dot insert. I wasn't quite sure how to insert a column. I could record myself doing it, and it would tell me that's what I should do. All right, I'm going to close both of these. And I've still got it set up for Utah. Seems like I shouldn't have left it set up for California as well. Just comment out my California line. So now when I run Utah, it should open up and it should say, hey, it doesn't say campus in B5, so let's insert a column. Acme subrunner is running. Did it do it? Oh yeah, look at that. There's now, there's no data. Like B5 didn't say anything because it used to say student enrollment, but I shifted it over. Excellent. So I'll run this through to close it. Now let me try it again with California. And it shouldn't change California. California should, yeah. Column C now is student enrollment. Ah, that's great. And because when I closed it, I said false here to save, it hasn't changed what that Utah sheet says. It's got the raw data starting with the original data each time I open it. Ooh. That's a good little clue to how to make this project go a lot easier. Let's see, what else did I cover last year? So I think we're at a point where we have a couple of options. If this was the content I really wanted to cover for today, we could call it good and move on, or we could keep working on the project. Who says, work on the project? Who says, let us out of here? You can go anytime. I'm going to keep working on the project. Feel free to leave, but be quiet as you leave. Okay, here's the next thing that's kind of difficult on this. If I look here at California, and it's not all the time, sadly. They've said, oh, look, here's like the Cal State system. It's got all these different campuses. And so we're going to merge this together. Yikes. That's, working with merged cells in Excel, your life is better if you don't have merged cells. Sometimes you can't work around it, but I think I'm going to be happier if I don't have merged cells. No problem. Right when I open it up, maybe the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say s.cells.unmerge. Just unmerge the cells. Now, when it comes open, yeah, here's my Cal State system. And those are all cells unmerged. That looks great. So now, like the next thing that's hard in this project is, how do I know when I'm done processing through the data? Almost every other time when we've said, hey, we've got some data to process, let's just process through it until what? Until we bump into an empty cell. Sadly for us, the geniuses at the FBI have put like comments like right here. And which column could I look at? Like to go for an empty, like after the data I've got, like after the data I'm interested in, I've got these footnotes. Ugh. Oh, maybe we could check on column D. I like it. Just go down column D. But the truth is, no matter which one of these columns I look at, it's a possibility for missing data. See how there's missing data on enrollment right here? What does that mean? There was no one enrolled in San Jose State University or Cal State San Jose? What does it mean? They just didn't report it. Maybe that's what the footnote is. I don't know if that's footnote 2. Student enrollment figures were not available. So yeah, we just couldn't get it for whatever reason. So they leave it blank. And if you look at column D, you're tempted because you go, oh, you know what? This is an aggregate. It's always going to be here. But if one of these 4 is missing, then this one goes to null as well. So it turns out there's no column that I could reliably look at and say, that's the one I'm going to work with. How I wish there was. Oof. And even looking for blanks is going to be hard here because there's blanks for the college, there's blanks in the campus, there's blanks everywhere. What other thoughts? Any other thoughts? Go ahead.
Just look for the little like superscript at the beginning.
Oh. You're making us, so you suggested, you say, you know what? Why don't we just look until we see the superscript? Now, my guess is there's a way to tell if that's a superscript, but if I just ask for the value of that, that's going to be a 1. And so I could still ask, I mean, do I expect to see any of my colleges start with the number 1? One college? And I can't imagine there's a college that starts with the number 1. That would be a way that would work. And it's a way that some students have done it. So some students have successfully said, keep looping until the first character is a 1. But in this case, I'm like relying on that it has to be a footnote, has to be there. And so, and can I imagine them? Ooh, I'm looking at this and now here's a problem. What if there's no footnotes, but just a note? Then that note would be right there where the 1 is. And while I don't think any of the files for this project are like that, the whole point is I should write this in such a way that it could work with next year's data. Caution should be exercised in making any intercampus comparisons or ranking schools because something. University college crime statistics are affected by a variety of factors. Okay, so other thoughts? I think that would serve you well for this project, but other thoughts? Yep. Oh, what you could say is, what if all of these columns are blank? Would we have a blank? Could we have a row that's completely blank? Why would you even have the record here if all of this data were blank? I think that would probably do the trick as well. I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure that would be good. Other thoughts? What else you got? Keep them coming. Oh, the border. This is what I want to do because it's something new. We haven't ever looked for the border before. So let's look for the border. All right. So let's just set up a loop to loop us through. I'm just going to do a do loop, and we're going to check for that border each time. Okay, so I've inserted the campus. Now I'm ready to iterate over the colleges. So do loop. Probably going to want a row variable. Maybe I'll come up to the top and declare a row variable. Dim R as a long. I got to figure out when to start. And in this case, you're going to just trust me to know that the very data always starts on row 6. So let's just believe that row 6. R equals 6. Do debug.print R. And why don't we print cells, row R, column 1, dot value. Do events. And I'm going to loop until okay, a little bit of a problem here. Let's loop until the bottom border is that border. I'm not even sure how to do that. So let me come here and just kind of poke around. So I've got the active cell right here on my last one. Cancel, whatever that was, cancel. I'm here on my last cell, active cell, dot, is there a borders property? Oh yeah, there's a borders property, borders, dot, So I'm sure there's going to be like a bottom border and a top border, line style parent. Don't like it. Or let's try it again. Dot borders. Borders around. Well, I'm not quite sure how to refer to that bottom cell. So when in doubt, record. So I'm going to come down here and just record myself putting a bottom border onto a cell. So come to my developer tab, record a macro. I need to get out of break mode, record a macro. All right, I just want to put the bottom border on. Oh, look, it's already default bottom border. Boom. And stop recording. Seems like that should have made a module for me. Oh, it made it in the California workbook. Bummer. It's okay. I just need to see the code. Oh, so it's borders and then in parentheses, edge bottom. Here we go. Oh, and it's got a line continuous, line style of continuous. Excellent. So edge bottom, line style continuous. Loop until until s dot cells row R column 1 dot borders XL bottom dot line style equals XL continuous. I think that's worth trying. Let me go ahead and close my California without saving it. And I'm ready to run my code. I'm really wishing I put a do events in there. Oh, I did. Whew. What did I forget to do? Yeah, I forgot to, I'm iterating, that's why I'm not moving, I'm looping, but so R increment, yeah, R equals R plus 1. Saved by the do events. That looks pretty good. So I finally got off of 6, Hancock College, after I wrote that about 1 million times. We got California, some that are blank, Cal State, and then a bunch of blank ones, so there's a bunch of Cal State schools. And then we get down to community college. Is that my last one? Ooh, I'm missing this one. Why? Why do I miss this one? What's that? Okay, let's check at the beginning. Let's find out. I'll stop that. Oh, I should have just run it. It would have closed itself. Don't save. I want to run this again. Ventura Community College. Same problem. Maybe instead of looking for when it's the bottom, I look for it when it hits the top. So when I get to this one, I'll look for the top instead of the bottom. So instead of XL edge bottom, let's do XL edge top. Run this through. XL edge top. And run it again. Better clear off my window. Run it again. Ugh. Didn't print anything this time. Yikes. Oh, it's true immediately right here. So I start on this one and it's already true. So what's the solution? Yeah, put it back to the bottom. So now I won't actually make the check until after I have done the first increment, taking me off that top cell. I think this is going to get it for us. Yeah, now we've got West Valley Mission College. So now we've got a loop that goes through and it processes each one of the rows. Now, kind of everything we've thought about doing is a little bit risky because who knows how this thing's going to be formatted the next year when it comes. But at least we know that all of the ones this year are going to have the same format. And whereas kind of looking for the number might be problematic, here we're looking for that line. I think that's going to be a good way to do it. All right, let me just give you one more pointer here and we'll call it good for today. So it turns out that we're going to have to write a query to enter the enrollment. We haven't learned how to do this yet, but we're going to have to tell our database to take in the enrollment and then a separate query to take in murder and forcible rape and robbery and so forth. But we're not taking in violent crime or property crime because those are just summaries of these. And we're not going to put the summary data into our database. We'll calculate the summaries if we need them. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to say, let's just get rid of these columns. Like, I don't need them for anything. There's summaries I don't care about. So I'll delete those. And then the other thing that will be that will make your life a little bit easier doing this project is the database column names you're working with are not exactly the same that are here. As you might guess, the guys who made the database didn't call their column murder and non-negligent manslaughter. If you were to kind of name a column for this, what might you name it? Like in a database. So I guess database has to have a name. What should we call it? Oh, you could call it deaths. Just something way shorter for my database name. Yeah, and actually the developers of the database that you have inherited for this project just called it murder. So yeah, we know it's murder and non-negligent manslaughter, but it's just called murder in the database. And so the other thing that would probably make your lives easier is to say, you know what, let me just put the database column names right in here, delete off these columns that we're not going to work with. And now I'm already iterating across each row. Now I just have to iterate across each of these columns, like across those 9 columns, and write a query that will put it in for each one as I go. And if I've changed the names that I need right here, then things have been organized pretty well for me. All right, that is a really good jumpstart on this project. You know, kind of doing almost everything. I mean, not almost everything. We're doing a lot of the stuff that really doesn't deal with the database management part. We've kind of laid out for you. So keep track of this project. Would be a great place to start, or this example would be a great place to start the project. All right, folks, thanks for coming. Class dismissed. Yes, my son. Put it right over here and I'll come look.